Hello, Hopkinton, and welcome back to the Hangout Hour. This HCAM TV series seeks to connect with you, with us, and our community. We have a mix of people in positions that serve our town and regular folk just living their lives. We want to hang out with all of you to see how you're doing and what you're up to lately. Here at HCAM, we like sharing stories, and we have greatly valued hearing yours. As with everything, there is a season, and this, the 196th episode, is our last. Any change is always bittersweet, but I do feel that this is the proper time to close this chapter and to turn our time and attention to other shows and other events to do what HCAM was designed to do, to connect Hopkinton, to inform, educate, and entertain our town. Before we turn out the lights, we have our final episode to bring you. I am grateful to have our superintendent, Dr. Carol Cavanaugh, joining me today. She has been a strong supporter of HCAM and throughout this pandemic has often appeared here to tell us of the latest struggles, provide us information, and share what her office, the school committee, and the entire Hopkinton Public Schools was undertaking to best support our kids at HPS. I spoke with her earlier today, and here is our conversation.
So, Dr. Cavanaugh, thank you very much for being here on this episode with us. I'm really excited to have you here on our last official taping of the Hangout Hour for now.
Well, thank you for having me on the last official taping of the Hangout Hour. It's kind of a moment in time, right?
It really is. You know, it really is. There are just certain moments where you can recognize something is different, something is changing. And later on in this episode, we have some memories over the series, and watching those really brought me back to what it was like at the beginning of this pandemic. You know, when we first stopped working and stopped being able to go into school, it was supposed to be for a couple of weeks. Do you remember that?
I sure do. One of the funny things, and I've probably told you this story before, but I think when we closed the schools, a group of administrators went into the high school and we decided we would wash all of the tables and chairs in there so we could get back to school on Monday.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I know the Historical Society is now putting together, you know, type of recordings for people to share those kind of memories and preserve those, because as we know, it's been 100 years since there's been something like this. It's, you know, I mean, they use the word unprecedented, but it really is amazing what we've been through. What was it like, if you can cast your mind back, going through this? You know, I think that there are lessons that have been learned and styles that have happened that we will carry forward. But if you could remember a little bit of when we first started going through this, what it was like for the perspective of a person working at the schools.
Sure. Well, I think in those early months in March, April, May of 2020, we were really just trying to figure out how you could deliver instruction online. And when the teachers worked together, what they realized is they could work smarter, not harder. So they kind of, especially at the elementary levels, what they did was they divvied up the work. So someone would take the ELA lesson and someone would take the math lesson and maybe a science lesson or a foundations lesson or whatever. And they would each create those and then be able to kind of share them. And I guess a good byproduct of it was that we had a whole lot of teachers really talking about curriculum and consistency and delivery of curriculum so that kids were getting, you know, pretty much a consistent package regardless of who you were. But we really scrambled to get that stuff together in just a little bit of time. You know, teachers were putting together these short videos and the principals were reviewing them, and then they would go out and then we would have small Zoom meetings. It was on, people don't realize, I don't think, how much work went into that. You know, and there was enormous pressure because you had to provide school in some way, shape, or form. It wasn't as if we could just kind of make these things and tweak them or massage them. They had to be done, and they had to be darn good, and they had to get out to kids. It was yeah, people scrambled. I think that might be the best word for it.
Yes. Yeah. I also think that when you look back, I wonder if did the community, and I mean the general community or the educational community, really realize the importance and value of the students being able to attend school rather than be at home. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about the damage and the trauma that has happened to a lot of people because they've been isolated for a year and a half or so. And I'm just wondering if there's been any kind of like recognition more than before how valuable it is for for community to gather.
So I think we're living that right now, and it's truly hard. We have, so the sixth grade teachers will say, oh, we're seeing behaviors that might be more typical of fourth grade students, or the high school teachers will say these kids are just amazingly immature, they're more like middle school kids. And I think that all of that just comes as a byproduct of really being kind of hunkered in your home. Even if you were a kid who last year went to school in a hybrid model, you were still sitting 6 feet away from your friends, and you were still all masked up so we didn't see each other's faces. And you probably didn't have a lot of social engagement outside of school. So a lot of really valuable social skills that would have been taught in classrooms or would have just been experienced kind of organically because you are a kid, those things didn't happen. And we are seeing the results of that. So in a lot of ways, kids don't really know how to talk to one another at their particular and appropriate developmental level. Kids, I think, have turned to social media and they've seen a lot of things there, whether it's TikTok or YouTube or wherever it is that they've gone. And now all of the things, it feels like the things that they have seen there and the things they've experienced there, they're coming into school and kind of trying those things on. And I'll tell you that very largely that's unsuccessful. So, there are a lot of behavior things that we are working on with students that we would not normally have had to work on with kids. There's a lot of social and emotional learning that needs to take place.
It's so interesting to think about that. It's so interesting to think that like this has been a forced learning experience for the value of in person or face to face or community gathering. It's really, in my opinion, kind of like a real life illustration of what had been talked about before, where people are living their lives online and they're different than their lives in real life, and how those things can kind of be in conflict. And it seems like, this is really illustrated in a huge way what that actually can mean. Mm-hmm. So now with that coming back, how does that inform what your work is with the school department and guiding school department in working with our kids? How does looking forward, what does that mean? What do you think might be some changes or different ways of looking at how we approach community?
Yeah, so I think teachers are now sort of more responsible than ever for creating community in the classroom. And so, what does that look like? I think that before we probably had kids who were, more talkative than others, or kids who were more likely to answer questions. But now I think we have to sort of build the structure where every kid feels like some kind of valued member of that community whose voice can be heard. And I think we have to probably do a lot more instruction where we have kids working in small groups so that they know how to communicate with one another. There are teachers now who are using some accountable talk phrases so that we actually explicitly teach children how to speak to one another, how to politely and respectfully disagree, how to push each other's thinking, how to promote more learning within a small group. Like, those are the kinds of things that I think we have to do more of than we ever did. It's not that we hadn't used those strategies before, but I think we really have to use those strategies kind of going forward. I also think that a lot of the social emotional learning competencies have to be taught in the regular education classroom. Before we would think about, I don't know, things like productive struggle in math. And we would say to kids, this is where you're going to really have to roll up your sleeves, and it's not going to be easy. You're going to have to work hard through this problem. But that can't just be a once in a while reminder. I think that has to be part of our daily instruction now. What does it mean when you're taking this test and you start to feel panic? Now that part of your brain, your amygdala, is hijacked, and I talk about it all the time. But when it happens, a kid can't function because it interrupts your working memory. So those are the things that we have to explicitly teach now. We can't just say we work with this individual kid or we remind them now and again. I think we need to be explicitly teaching SEL and establishing classroom community, because those are the ways that I think we might accelerate the growth.
I see. Are there new resources that are being formulated that you're seeing that you will be tapping into and looking to bring into the schools? Are there new types of curricula, or are there new types of people who run training workshops to bring these skills in? What are you seeing happening?
Well, I think this is coincidental. I don't necessarily know that it was something that the pandemic was a cause and effect kind of factor for. But we have a new social emotional learning director. And so some of those CASEL competencies are things that she'll be working with teachers and administrators to ensure that we really are kind of not just thinking about tangentially, but thinking about in terms of lesson planning. How does this particular, even things, this will be maybe interesting, like the way you set up your classroom. If you set up your classroom with your desks and rows, it says to the kids, I'm kind of the teacher, I'm the holder of knowledge, and you're the recipient of the knowledge. But if we set up a horseshoe and the teacher is at the opening of the horseshoe, it still puts that teacher in the place where she's facilitating dialogue, but it says, in this horseshoe, we want you to all communicate with one another. If you create a circle and everyone sits in it and the teacher sits as well, now every voice should be equal. So a lot of times, even as you're thinking about lesson planning, your classroom configuration should serve that. If you've got kids who are going to produce something before the end of the period or work hard to solve a problem together, you might put your desks in groups of threes, and it says this group has to equally participate in whatever this task at hand is. So we're even working at that level, I think, with teachers, or we hope to get to that place where we're doing that soon. Yeah, I think that those are the kinds of things that are really important. And maybe it just, the teachers all could volunteer recently to take an executive functioning course, and that was paid for by the district. And if it was something that you felt would be another tool in your toolbox, then a teacher could enroll in that course. So a lot of good things, I think, going on. But, again, with this pandemic, it's all been catch up. You're always on that treadmill and you're racing to stay ahead of it. And pretty much you don't stay ahead of it. If you can keep pace with it, you're doing well.
Yes. Now, in your role, you work with state entities and I don't know, maybe federal entities. I don't know if I've heard too much about that, but also other groups that have more of an overview, and you look to bring that knowledge and direction into our community so that we're following, the guidelines and we're getting the things done that we need to do. Over the course of this pandemic, and now as things are starting to open up more and getting closer back to real life, how has that changed? Has any of the organizations changed, like how they communicate or interact with you, or how they gather knowledge, how they pass it along? What's that landscape look like?
I will say that's some rugged terrain. Look, the way the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has worked, and Jeffrey Riley and the governor, we are typically, superintendents across the state are typically alerted a day or two ahead of when they want to deliver new information to us. So that doesn't really give you an awful lot of time to change your trajectory or your decision making or those kinds of things. And sometimes they'll tell you that on a particular date, a week out or 2 weeks out, something will change. But sometimes they'll tell you, we're going to make this announcement tomorrow morning, get ready. I think the summer of 2020 was very hard because they kept saying 3 feet would be the minimum for social distancing. But as you know, schools and teachers associations and I mean, that's statewide. We were all very leery of a 3 foot. And the virologists would tell us, no, that should work. But it was really hard to trust those numbers when there was no vaccine and people were dying. So going into school that year, I mean, there was an awful lot of alarm. And I know I've said it to you before that I didn't think that we would stay open past Halloween, but we did. So that was pretty astounding. But I think some of the struggles we had is that, and I understand why we had these struggles, but a lot of that placing things on the local control makes it really tricky. So, I mean, I think just in recent days, you've seen all of the issues with unmasking. When will a community decide to drop their own local mask mandate? Would it be February 28th, March 7th, March 14th? We're not ready yet. We're already there. So those are, and I get the idea that it can't be one size fits all, because some communities would have hundreds of cases while others may not have a single case at all. When we would look at some of the 2020 numbers, some of the places in the western part of the state, their numbers were so low, they could have opened their doors, I think, to all kids, every day, but it was hard to tell what would happen.
I mean, I know, I've made this comment before, but I'm sure you'd rather call snow days every day rather than have to deal with this every day, because at least a snow day, you have a lot more, information, and it's really right there and then it's over. This thing, it was so big and you just never knew what was going to happen. I remember the first vote to go mask optional at the high school. That was a very torturous vote for the school committee to take. They really agonized over that.
They did. And I agree with them when they say, we are just local people who have run for school committee. We're not health experts. We're not public health officials. It's really hard because, we're just people looking at data and making decisions that impact a lot of children and families. So I understand their agony. It could not have been easy to be making those choices then. What was interesting though, and I was thinking back on this today, in November, we really had in that whole 30-day period, only one case of COVID at the high school. And we knew that the student who got COVID had contracted it in the home. So it felt so good then to be thinking we are emerging from this. And then only days later, there was an Omicron variant that was wildly contagious and everybody got COVID. As you looked at our data from the first week in January to now, 2 weeks in a row, we had 204 people in both weeks. So 408 people contracted COVID in the public schools, pre-K to 12.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a lot.
That one came on. That variant was so fast, fast. And at least so far, looking, it looks like it has receded just as quickly. So that's like only, I'll tell you, I don't know. And you talk about how the school committee are just, people who run to help their schools. You also, you're not a public health official, you're a school administrator. This is really outside of the normal demands that would be, on a school superintendent. And I just wonder, to me, on the outside looking in, I just would think that the departments in the federal and the state and the town board of health, those are the people I think who should be more tasked with getting this information and helping to make the right decisions, rather than leaving so much up to so many individuals, whether it be a superintendent or a committee or a business whose their job is making widgets. It's not understanding how the virus and the pandemic flows. It just seemed to me to be a really, really crazy time of all kinds of signals and different types of information going back and forth. It must have been really hard to parse that information. Although maybe I'm looking more globally, and maybe Massachusetts and what you were looking at was more all along the same vein. How did that go for you?
Uh, it, you talk about the learning curve. It was enormous. We were, in a place where we had just replaced, and this is just crazy anecdotal stuff, but we had taken all of the paper towels out of our restrooms and gone with the air blower hand dryers. Nope, all the paper towels went right back in. I learned more about HVAC and how air comes in from the outside and how it's circulated and warmed and sent in. And do you take some of that air because it's already warm and recycle it? Not anymore. You don't. You take all fresh air and keep pushing it in, which makes the temperatures in classrooms go down. How much air comes into a school bus if you're riding with the windows open 1 inch, 2 inches, fully open? I mean, all of that kind of stuff you had to learn. You really, when a kid is sitting in a seat and he's just breathing typically with a mask on, how far will aerosolization spread? How will that be affected by fans in the front, windows open? So it was absolutely kind of crazy scientific learning, but we all had to do it to understand how best to keep people safe. And I think in the beginning there was an awful lot of fear. That August of 2020 was amazing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's really interesting because even when you're talking about all of that type of information that you learned that you had to go through, just prior you had said that, well, the state was saying, no, 3 feet is fine, 3 feet is fine, but you were expressing discomfort with that and concern over that, because we always have health and safety as our highest priority.
Yes.
So I just think, that there was just so much information, and I'm hoping that all of this is reviewed and cataloged and stored away, to help even other types of public health issues.
Yes. And there was no vaccine then, I think that's now that there is one and there's so much less fear because of it. When you turn the clock back a year when there was no vaccine, people were.
Yeah, I know. I mean, washing their groceries and, just all kinds of really scary stuff going on there.
Yeah.
Now, during that time also, how has it been? What kind of communications have you had with the community, with the parents of the schools? We're all going through this, and not only are each of the parents concerned about their livelihood and their kids, they're also thinking about their kids, relative to the school system and what they're learning, what they're doing. I haven't seen a lot of conflict over some of the big issues that kept us as healthy as we could through this pandemic. But I'm just wondering what you saw that maybe we didn't see, that you had to encounter and communicate and deal with parents.
Yeah, so I think that there were some parents who were concerned about learning loss. And so much so that there have been parents who even filed with DESE. So DESE has a problem resolution system. So you can file there and say, I just don't think that my child is learning enough. And then we would have to explain to DESE what our hybrid model looked like. And they would say, okay, well, that is a viable model. I know it's not, I know no hybrid model is probably great. You want kids in school every single day. But there were parents who were very concerned about that. And I think rightfully so. I think when you have kids who need to learn math, you need direct instruction, for example, or foreign language, you need direct instruction. So for kids to kind of, muddle through an at-home day of either just practice, which is good for kids, of course, but it doesn't promote sort of new learning, or you give them something and ask them to kind of tackle it on their own. That's when I think kids are met with frustration. So we had those kinds of issues. We also had parents who were absolutely positively kind of dead set against putting their kids into school buildings. They were just sure that whether it's because they had someone immunocompromised at home or whether they were just fearful of the virus generally. So, we heard a lot from parents about not opening in August of 20. There was a lot of that. Oh, we heard a lot about riding on buses. They were very, very leery of riding on buses. And I think most recently, that we have a lot of opinions about mask wearing. Should people still be wearing masks or should they not? When does this, pandemic kind of transition to an endemic? So we have a lot of that, but you do hear from parents very frequently because they have strong opinions either way. And I think in some ways the school's hands have been tied, on some issues. But I think, in other places, there have been changes that we have made because parents have asked for that.
Right.
I think we did a pretty good job of being able to give people what they needed. I think like our at-home instruction, if you were a fully remote kid, our teachers worked super hard to keep kids engaged. And I mean, you and I right now are on a Zoom call, and that there are times when it's really tricky to stay engaged in that, especially if you are on a Zoom call, not just with two people having a conversation, but when you have 20 kids and a teacher, that's tricky.
Right. So now at this point, we're mid to late February now, and the how is the school committee doing, and how are you doing with some of the big issues that are happening now? Tell me a little bit about what went into the latest mask optional decision.
Sure. So I think really with the latest mask optional decision, what I had said to you just a few moments ago, that we had been at 204 students, faculty, members of the community testing positive for 2 weeks in a row. Coincidental that we had the same number 2 weeks in a row. But the last time we looked at our numbers, it was down to 20 for the entire school department for a week. And, when you're talking 20 and you're talking people who are vaccinated, and you have a week's vacation as well. You got to a place where you knew you had to unmask sooner or later. And so I think our choices were probably like March 7th, which would have given us a week out from vacation, or February 28th. And, with the numbers coming down so precipitously, I think that it was just, it was okay to choose either one of those. And I think the committee just went with February 28th. Either one of those dates, I think I would have been myself okay with. One of the other things I think that we're seeing now, Jim, that is making me feel pretty good is when we had all of that worry about learning loss. If we start to look at some of the scores that we have in front of us, whether that is, a STAR reading score or a benchmark assessment system score, BAS, which we talk about a lot here, or just even some, locally scored math exams, those kinds of things. STAR does both reading and math. QRI kinds of testing. What we are seeing is that our kids are catching up academically. And so I'm not really worried about the academic piece. I think that, our teachers are teaching the heck out of it, and our kids are learning a lot and catching up to where we want them to be. And I'm eager to see where our, MCAS tests will be in the spring of 22 and all of that. I feel good about the instruction. The social emotional and the behavioral, that's where we have an awful lot of work to do. When people talk about the detriments of kids being outside of school, I think it's very real, the social and emotional losses that have taken place.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's really, I'm, it's encouraging to hear that. It's encouraging to hear that not only are you seeing some rebounding in the scores and, and kids are catching up, but also that, what the challenge is going to be, and, you're preparing for that. We only have like a minute left. I'm wondering, is there anything in the new budget that will be coming up in town meeting that's like geared towards that? Or are you handling everything within the framework that you've already built at the schools?
No, I think that we're pretty well staffed in terms of counselors and our new social emotional learning director. But I think what you will see in the budget coming up is increased costs in special education. I think at the last school committee meeting, we presented that, 10 students, for example, at Hopkins have qualified for special education services. And I think that there are 15 more in that building that need to be tested to see if they'll qualify or not qualify. And while Hopkins seems to, 10 kids is really almost a whole educator's caseload in that building. So we will be looking for more special education staff, whether that's educators, special education learning specialists, or paraprofessionals. And we've had an uptick in our out of district expenditures too. So I think that that's what you're seeing. And probably a lot of that has to do with, byproducts of the pandemic. So that people will see at town meeting.
All right. Well, thank you again, as always, for your time. It's always really insightful and interesting to find out, what the schools are going through and what they're thinking about looking forward. And I do very much look forward to seeing you in a different venue in the very near future. So thank you for all your time.
Well, thank you, Jim. I'm so glad to be here for the last Hangout Hour.
Yes. All right, Carol. You have a great day. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
As always, my profound thanks to what our superintendent does for our town and for taking the time to be here today. Before we go, Mike has edited a final segment of highlights to bring you. And before that, I wanted to take a moment to thank you all for making this program successful. The staff here at HCAM have done a fantastic job of working through the pandemic. And Mike, Tom, Matt, and Bob are the best crew I've had the honor of working with in my career. I have heard many comments that the Hangout Hour kept people in touch and informed during the very long period of social distancing and staying home. It is very heartwarming for me to hear that and all the other nice things, because that's what we do. Try to keep us talking and interacting. I won't mention any specific guests because I wouldn't be able to stop from listing all of them. Town officials, business people, those cooped up at home, just everyone. Thank you for sharing your time and your stories with us. Not only has this pandemic changed me, but the Hangout Hour has changed HCAM TV, and I look forward to seeing you soon. I'd like to welcome the community to our very first Hopkinton Hangout Hour. During this time, while our community is looking to socially isolate and keep our distance, we want to step in and try to keep us connected virtually. So I know the quality of this is not what you usually expect from HCAM, but the emphasis here is on connecting community, getting people talking, getting people to share their stories and be able to, get some information along the way too.
Meeting with the school committee today or tonight. And as I said, I'm on the phone. I've been on the phone every day with Dr. Kavanaugh and her administration. But it's an interesting. It's a complicated process because you're trying to control for multiple variables. But we believe that we've got. The building is in good, all the buildings are in good shape. We've got controls, policies, and procedures in place.
The state still has not met, so we're still officially in the stage 1 drought for Massachusetts. But I think they're meeting either today or tomorrow. And I would think with the rain they had, they will most likely revise that standard. It was great to get the rain a couple weeks ago. Unfortunately, we also suffered some damage as we had quite the lightning storm that accompanied some of it last Saturday. But a couple of our wells took a strike and we had to replace some equipment down there. Unfortunately, we're able to get most of those back up and running. We have one well that's currently down for another issue, but we're working on that at the moment.
Yeah, and I would add, I think that, so actually it was last school year, I had a conversation with one of our students who actually reached out to me, wanted to schedule an opportunity to talk about curriculum and his experience going through Hopkinton Public Schools. And So I had the assistant superintendent that Carol just mentioned, Jen Parson, joined me, and we had a really rich conversation with that student. Jen and I met afterwards and talked about some changes that we can make, and that has been in play. And I talked to teachers about this concept of windows and mirrors, which is not a concept that I came up with by any means, but it's a terminology out there that, when you're in a learning environment, there needs to be curricular materials that reflect who you are as a person, but also shed a light on other people that are not like you in a variety of different ways.
This is my nature collage craft number 1. She's very cute. I'm not going to name her, but she's very cute. All right.
Now, are there products that you could use that would keep those, keep the leaves like from drying out? Is there like treatments for it or anything like that would make it last?
Yes, there is. You can. Well, if you were going to really preserve that, you would mount it probably in an acrylic box frame, and you would spray it with I want to say fixative, but I think that's a photographic term. But there is material, there is acrylic or something spray that you can put on there to keep it intact.
Yeah, so Thompson's boot manufacturer, and if you look, I can't blow it up with the current software that I have it on right now, but this little sign right here says Grove Street. So this was the boot factory that is where CVS is today.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is Grove Street going up and Main Street running in front.
Now, when did that come down? Do you know?
Yeah, so that came down, it would have been early 1900s.
Oh.
Because this was a big boot factory in the 1800s. And if you blow this up, you can actually see people in the window, some of the people who are working in the factory. It's really a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And this was their post factory. This was the town barn for a lot of years.
Is this down by Ash Street?
This is right here.
Oh, that's
right
close,
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the same location. That's where this was.
Oh.
But I think one of the things about implicit bias is, when we say no one is born with biases, we learn them over time. And what we have to recognize too is that it's really hard to unlearn those. If somebody says to you, if you've been raised with the notion that green-eyed people are bad people, every time you see a green-eyed person, logically in your mind, you might be thinking, that's right, Carol, dial it back because green-eyed people aren't bad people. But that will still come into your head, and you have to recognize that it did and say, this is the thing that I'm trying to remove from that learning that has been perpetuated over a very long period of time.
Yes.
All right, so Tom got some responses from social media, which is very exciting to me, and he's going to share some.
All right, well, I asked, what advice would you give this year's graduates? And Sharon said this, if you want to know where you're going, look where you've been. Your interests and desires will always be the same. They make you you and are woven like a thread in a piece of fabric. Challenge yourself and don't be afraid to fail. You will learn most from your failures and grow because of them. Strive to be a kind, caring, thoughtful, compassionate adult. Best of luck, class of 2020.
That's so, Abby, that's so cool. That's so cool. Next thing you know, you'll be worldwide, which will be great.
That's my dream is to be United States wide. I mean, I really feel so passionate that this information needs to be in middle schools and high schools and in communities. But the fact that kids graduate from high school and don't necessarily know what anxiety is or what clinical depression is or many other of the mental illnesses and how to promote positive mental health. The fact that that isn't something that's taught in schools is really concerning to me, because our brains are one of our most important organs in our body, probably in my mind, the most important one. And things just aren't going in the right direction in terms of that type of...
Bob, thanks for being with us.
Happy to be with you. Good to see you, Tim.
Well, we may do just a quick little tutorial. Bob is the president of corporate communications, and give us a quick little overview of corporate communications, and then the subset of that, which will lead into our discussion about the work you're doing in Boston.
Oh, thank you, Tim. Good to be on the air. Corporate communications, well-known name in Hopkinton manages trade shows and events across the country and across the world for major corporations and associations. And a subset of that service pertains particularly to Boston, where a division, Corporate Events New England, provides union-affiliated labor at the Boston Convention Center, the Heinz Convention Center, and local hotels at the various trade shows.
Going through a whole different process, mode of doing it. We're doing it through telehealth right now. Most of us are doing it. I'm doing that 100%. I don't see any clients face to face because I want to role model that we need to social distance. And it was hard work with clients to get to that point, but everybody understood.
You hear a lot about this idea of being, anti-racism and being an anti-racist. And, I've done a lot of reading of that over the summer, and I know many of us have. And, we'll talk about some of the different groups that we're trying to put together as we get through this hour here. But, I think you really need to and this is not going to be something where we're going to put a policy in place, we're going to bring in a guest speaker, we're going to do something, and everything is going to be solved, right? This is hard work. This is going to be work that's going to take time. We need to do a lot of listening, but all of our decisions need to take the anti-racist lens. And what I mean by that is in our professional interactions, in our communications with students, in our policies that we make, in our classroom structures, in family and community engagement. That needs to be at the center of all of our different interactions and decisions that we make. It can't just be a one-off. It can't be something that we're doing in addition to. It has to be embedded in what we're doing. And that takes time, and it takes a lot of voices. And I'm hoping that this movement will start to get us there. I think there's a lot of good momentum. I think we have some really amazing kids in this community that are so courageous, that are bringing this to the forefront. And I know that we have done a lot at the high school, which I can talk about later, but clearly there's more to be done. And I think we need to hear from those voices and have them be comfortable enough to put their name in front of it.
It was kind of a group effort, but we saw that there was a need a few weeks ago when things started to ramp up. It seemed like face coverings were becoming a heavy, hot topic. So we reached out. I reached out to a couple of the Hopkinton free sites and asked for some sewing machine donations. Because we didn't own a sewing machine.
Wait a minute. You didn't own a sewing machine?
No.
Okay.
We didn't own a sewing machine.
That's pretty amazing. Go ahead.
We didn't know how to sew.
No, we didn't know how to sew either.
So there you are, looking like you've always had a sewing machine since you were little. And then, there we go. There's a mask right there. 2 sewing machines right on the table, the 2 that you guys got.
Yes.
Oh, even Dad's getting in the action.
Again, I was fortunate to get the job and kind of come in late. I started in very late August. The fall season had already started. It's certainly been an eventful year one in Hopkinton.
Well, Rich, I think you've done a great job in your first year as Hopkinton athletic director, especially considering in your first year, you had to transform the entire fall schedule pretty much to an all-afternoon schedule because of the triple E mosquito threat. And now you're trying to make a schedule through a virus pandemic. You've had to deal with quite a bit in your first year at Hopkinton.
Yeah, it's been an interesting year. I mean, obviously, so many communities were in the same situation with triple E and trying to balance that. We all had schedules that involved night games, and we all had to adjust, on the fly. And, I have to say the students, the coaches, the community, we're all very understanding. It was really out of our hands, and it was really just to make sure that everyone was safe, out on our fields.
I've been thinking a lot about lately our Hopkins community organizations, civic organizations, and I'm not referencing the elected and appointed boards. We know they've continued their work, and we're happy to have them continue to do that. But I'm talking about the kind of civic organizations that the three of us have run into and how important they are to the community. And I think there are many times we take them for granted.
COVID gave us Hopkins' second manned fire station on the west side of town, Station 2, the old Woodville station. And I'm guessing that's still going.
Yeah, it is. I evaluate that ongoing. So the fact that we had such a low rate of COVID and that Station 2 is ideally positioned as I keep looking at it and deciding what to do. And I'm just taking it on a week-by-week basis. And I'll just kind of update the community as I go.
Take it away. Tell us what's coming up.
Well, tomorrow we have, I'm going to be on with some of my friends. We're going to be talking about board games and what board games we like to play in isolation. So anyone watching, we would love to have you on the comments talking about what board games you like to play. And you can also see us on Facebook and other social media. We're going to be having Darlene and Melissa Hayes on talking about college and what some of the challenges of being in college right now must be like. And at 7 tomorrow evening, Cheryl Peralta is going to be having some guests on a late night, not a late night show, an evening show. That's kind of a mix of the two programs she does for HCAM, Wake Up and Smell the Poetry and Meet Your Neighbor. And on Sunday, we're going to be having a Sunday church service for the churches in town.
Wonderful. That's great. Thank you for that. And thank you for taking part in the show. And thank you to the viewers for tuning in and checking us out. Please stay safe and stay in touch. Have a great day.